As part of AQMAT's series of presidential interviews, it gives me great pleasure today to welcome the president and founder of OzBlock. It's a revolutionary company, and yet it comes from a very traditional region, Lac Saint Jean. So we're going to talk to the company's leader, Mr. Marco Tremblay. Hello and welcome to AQMAT. So OzBlock was born about 5 or 6 years ago, but we absolutely must go back a bit to understand how you came up with this product and company name. We must go back, not to your youth, but to your first experiences with the construction industry. Mr. Tremblay, perhaps because your father was disabled, you had to roll up your sleeves and enter the workforce quite young, and you found yourself working in the construction industry, an industry that is relatively conservative. Tell us about your beginnings. What did you do at the beginning? What kinds of things were you faced with?
Well, given that my father was disabled, he only had one arm and he did quite well. We say jack of all trades in our hometown. He repaired things in his garage, except that I had to be near him all the time to help him, and it taught me my mechanical side, which I have learned early on. I studied there with him at the beginning. It didn't serve me long because I didn't like it much. I loved the great outdoors. I got my construction cards after that. I went to work in the Canadian North. We were doing runs in James Bay at the time, LG2 and things like that. After that, we worked on First Nations reserves. So I started my family. We had 3 children. But there comes a time when working in the North gets old and tiresome. So I came back to work in the South, but there was less work. That's where I started. I opened a construction company so I could stay close to home.
And you noticed that at the time, buildings were built a certain way, and if we take a leap in time to 2021, we still build the same way for the most part. It shocked you, or at least it surprised you.
The idea behind all of that is that even in the North, we were building houses, and after 7, 8, 10 years, the houses were ruined because of the humidity, and people don't take care of their buildings very well either. I always thought that this situation could be improved, that it has not evolved. We used to say that sawmills came about when our grandfathers were building. They took the sawdust, they put it into the walls, they made houses with 2x4s and newspapers, things that were available to them at the time. But if we look at today, all the products have changed. If we talk about tongue and groove boards, it has become OSB, etc. But apart from that, all the layers have changed. But the product itself, we're still building with 2x6 structures in the Nordic countries. There are 2 types of constructions on Earth. You have either 2x6 wooden structures or concrete for the countries further south.
Then there comes an experience. You started Habitation de Patriote. Basically, you build cabins, mostly from logs, I'd imagine.
When I worked up north, to make this a short story, when I worked up north, the winters were harsher. I went to work as a mechanic, then a welder in sawmills. Mostly I worked for Barrett and Chappé's at the time. Mr. Barrett had a high-tech mill, so we were always working with high technology and high-performance mills. During the winter, I worked there, and during the summer, I went back to work up north. That's where I got my experience in machinery. And I also had my building permit at the same time. And then what happened, at one point, I had a partner. Then, my partner and I had to split. He was the one who picked up the company. I had a non-compete clause for 5 years, so I had to renew myself. One time, I was going through the Laurentian Park, and there was a gentleman who carved logs to build houses by hand. I simply stopped to see him and asked how much those would cost. I also asked about his delivery time. He told me the cost was $45 a foot and there would be a 2-year lead time. So a little entrepreneurial spark came on, and I said to myself, can it be a 2-year wait? Back in those years, in construction, we were arguing over a small slice of pie in Saguenay. Then there, I started to ask myself, how can I do this but faster? So I worked in my garage at home to make a machine that makes round logs, but machined.
You two were like your father, a jack of all trades.
Yes, some investors back home have said that we are jack of all trades. So I invented the machines to make round timber, but machined. That was popular because I offered a 6-week delivery time instead of 2 years of waiting. Then, instead of using crooked logs to build a home with the air coming in, it was all very uniform and sealed. It also made it easy to mount the cabinets on the wall, but it also did well because log cabins were very trendy at the time. We had big log homes in Western Canada, then we brought it back to the rest of Canada. This is where I developed a large distribution network, which has helped me today.
And those were the years when we began to travel to Maine and other states where we often see wood being used. We used it as a structure, but outside we added stucco. Those were good years to promote this particular product, but you still sold the business.
Yes, I sold the business because I'm a guy who likes challenges. I had reached the top with the company. We knew that log homes were a marginal product. I was at the top of what I could do in Eastern America. I said to myself, now is the time to sell and move on. I had the OzBlock project. At the time it wasn't called OzBlock, and I wanted to reach more people, to get into construction in general with a new product that I had been developing since 2012. I started to work on the product to improve the concept and the system. But it took a long time because the corners alone took a very long time to develop, to get them just right. Because I know the construction industry, and people are quite cautious about new materials, and God forbid if the product has gaps. The word gets around quickly. We saw this with strand boards. When they started to come out, the product was chipping on the sheds and people shunned them for years. I wanted to release a product that was right on the spot.
And so the idea was to create a product for a wall that already incorporated its insulation, and then to reduce the assembly time. Those were part of your objectives. But there was no labor shortage at the time, or at least not as much as today. But perhaps you were a pioneer. You said to yourself, if something is easier to assemble, with less machinery or no machinery, it seems to me that you'd have some competitive advantages. Was that what was on your mind?
Yes, there was that, but the main reason was that I wanted to be able to no longer have distribution networks where you must serve customer by customer. Let me explain this to you. When we build prefab homes or when we sell homes, you'll serve your customer only once, and the next year it will be another customer. So I wanted to build a factory that was exportable. That is to say, we always make the same product. That's why I made the OzBlock base in an 8-foot length with 4 or 5 accessories. With that, we can build anything. So the idea was to manufacture OzBlocks, to warehouse them, and to have no lead times. And on top of that, we worked on the insulation to have a product that was efficient, structurally also, so that there are no mistakes in the construction. About the workforce, we have no workforce. Let's agree that it's easy to assemble. Even someone who is less experienced or less competent can assemble it without making any mistakes.
There's no screwing issues.
No. We've developed a lock system to assemble the OzBlocks together. Listen, it takes a drill with a chainsaw to cut the blocks, and a level. We can put the required tools into the trunk of a Honda Civic. There's no need for a big construction trailer to build with OzBlocks.
But to bring about a change in this construction industry, you hit a wall that's as hard as yours.
That is the biggest challenge.
A little, because it took you 5 years to be successful. But it didn't happen easily because people are used to doing things their way. So you have to break habits, then find the right people among the builders, designers, and architects, people who will be open to change.
That's where we're at. We had to prove ourselves. We built houses and we proved ourselves. People are afraid of change in general. On the other hand, there are people who are more willing than others and who are more open-minded to change.
How does your product behave when it comes to installing doors and windows? Is it more complicated or easier than other methods?
It's not more complicated and it's not easier. On the other hand, you do not need to fabricate the opening. The opening is simple in itself. We cut the block, we move it on the other side, then the same block goes to the top of the window. So to install a window is the same principle as installing a window in a conventional wall. On the other hand, making the opening itself is simple. In addition, we cut and we start the other side. We install the window header and it is finished, quite simply. I'll give you another simple example when it comes to installation and wall performance. I often give this example to my customers and to my staff, everyone who works in construction. We take an outlet, like that one there, and drill a hole into a wall of insulation. What happens? Can we pull the drill bit out of there? No? Why? Because the wool is wrapped around the drill bit. Nobody opens the wall. It spends its life creating condensation, and after 20 years we wonder why the wall is rotten. because the insulation got wrapped around the drill bit, and it stays that way for its entire life. If we use the example of walls that are shackled and prefab walls, well, the insulation will drop into the walls. It spends its life like that. An OzBlock wall, you can use a drill bit anywhere on the walls. You can drill, slide your wire through, fill it with a little bit of urethane, and it's done. A kitchen hood is the same thing. A small hole, fill it with urethane, and it's done.
You're talking about insulation at the moment. You chose to go with solid polystyrene. Then there were two options, extruded or expanded. If I'm not mistaken, you chose expanded. Why?
Well, we chose the expanded at the beginning because it's environmentally better rated than the extruded. It doesn't emit any F gases, and it was found to be the best material on the market, environmentally speaking. It is made of 2% petroleum material, which is a plastic, and 90% of air. It's the material with the smallest ecological footprint.
Exactly, so this is the one you've used from the start. Then the wood component is OSB. OSB has had a roller coaster price like plywood. You and your customer must have experienced a rock and roll time during the past year and a half with the pandemic. But first, let's talk about the bright side. The OSB that you use is a high-end quality, and it is made in Quebec, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we work with Norbert, which is now West Fraser, and then it's an OSB that comes from Abitibi, from La Sarre. We don't just use any kind of OSB. We use flooring OSB to be more specific. Right now, it's Stable Edge, but it could be a Vantec in another company, or whatever, but it's an OSB that will resist water, which has a much higher structural resistance than a standard OSB that we will also put on the walls.
Yes, and then assembling OSB with expanded polystyrene, it's part of your recipe. But you said at the very beginning of the interview that you still worked hard on the corners, like some of the Montreal Canadiens players. You had to be very inventive to finally convince construction workers that it is easy to handle.
Well, in reality, what we didn't want was to start putting screws all over the place, so we developed a lock system. Why? Because we can slide the block anywhere and lock it anywhere, without beginning to pierce the wall envelope with drills or screws. Because each hole makes a hole, in this case, it doesn't break the wall envelope that much, but it is still not easy to tighten it together than if we had screwed with screws. Tightening it from the top, given that it's OSB, it would have cracked and it wouldn't have done a good job. But most important of all were the corners. Why? Because we didn't want to have any waste. If we have made tongue and groove corners and then get to a part where we do not have male-female, there would have been waste on the construction site. With OzBlock, there is no waste on a site. That is to say, you won't have a full container of trash. You know at the end, if the guy's a contractor and he's building other homes, if he has a piece of starting rail or a piece of block left over, he'll take it and use it on his next site project. He's going to recuperate it.
God knows that right now we're all short on manpower, so how do you position yourself on this issue?
In reality, I feel that there are two parts to this question. There's the logistics aspect, which is a big part for the contractor's job. That is to say that building walls isn't everything. It's all the logistics that must be handled before, from making a plan of the house to ordering the stock, to having it on site at the right time, all of that. And in our case, given that we have OzBlocks, corners, and starters, the contractor can say, send me 8 pallets of OzBlocks on the floor with 12 corners, and if there are any left, we'll send them to another site. That's a logistical part that people don't necessarily see at first, but it's easy. Another example, a woman is on the job site and she wants her window to be moved 8 inches in a different way. It's no problem, and it doesn't take longer to move it 8 inches as we work up the house. By using OzBlock, it helps make the day go by smoothly. This is an entire logistical part which leads the contractor to say, there's no need to order the walls, for example, prefabricated walls, 2, 3 weeks, 1 month, 2 months in advance? Or did we make a mistake in the plans? So we're able to save a lot of time on the logistical part. The other thing, in terms of construction labor, is that we don't need to have specialized labor. Yes, it still takes qualified guys. It takes guys to do the floors. But you can put a good guy who knows his job with 2 apprentices who are just starting. Then you don't have to worry that they'll make a mistake. Will they use a jack for the window header? Are they going to put the window in the right place? Example, will the window height be correct? You can't go wrong with OzBlock. It builds at the right height. If the width of the window is an inch short, we can cut it and resize it and it's all done. But you don't need high quality labor. You can have the right quality of labor. But if these guys are better used elsewhere, where you need to build big skylights, you can put the less specialized guys on that.
Of course. So the fact that the product is manufactured in the factory, can it be a guarantee of the manufacturing quality in the eyes of the contractors and in the eyes of the customers who will eventually live in the house?
Yes, because the blocks are certified. We have certification codes that you don't have in prefab wall shops, for example. The guys manufacture according to the best industry practices, but because we have a certification process, the block is always the same. Always the same insulation, always the same thickness, always the same size, always the same. Even when you install it, you can't make any mistakes. It's impossible. It's always the same.
Then you are a well-shod shoemaker, since I think you have or are developing a more automated factory to respond to the challenge of getting labor, but also to provide an even more consistent quality than before. Am I wrong, or are those your goals?
No, it's been running for a few months now. We built it during the pandemic. It was to be operational in 2020. We entered into operation with the new plant in March-April of this year, in 2021.
Tell us a bit more. Where is it?
It's in St. Henry de Talen, near Alma. We've been working on this project for 2 years. The process is modernized, and we get a higher consistency of product and production quality. For example, the glues are well applied, the temperatures, the pressed sections. Because if it's done by hand, you can get a guy who applies less glue, for example. So in this case, it's all automated, so there can be no errors. And besides that, with the labor shortage we've been experiencing, we're happy to have made this move. We now have consoles, and people are working on consoles, and it's automated.
Can you tell us how much money this project took?
We've invested close to $5 million into this production line.
And all this at a time when COVID hit us. But in reality, you're now happy to have a factory that is a little more automated because it takes the pressure off the workforce issues, right?
Well, there's that, and also that we started from the equivalent of doing 2 homes per day per shift to 8 houses per day per shift. So now we have a production capacity which is much higher, and with a product quality which is more consistent than what we had before.
Do you have crazy delivery times like we see in other sectors?
No, we have no lead times. In fact, our delivery times are just shipping schedule to setup. Logistics is about 2 weeks. But as I said, given that we always make the same product, we can store 10,000 blocks and serve customers during the winter, and after that, in the summer. We serve our clients no problem.
So let's talk about sales strategy. We've talked a lot about manufacturing and entrepreneurship with you, but one of the major elements of the business plan is, how am I going to make the product sell? You have the residential market, therefore that of renovation centers. A lot of people who are watching us operate lumberyards, and I think you've reached a point where you want to make the product's virtues known to the professional customers in particular. That is to say, the contractors, the designers, the architects, the engineers, so that they can spread the good news, and that's how it will get to the consumer, and potentially the network of lumberyard companies, the banners, will take an interest in it and create a demand with their professional customers. Is that what you were aiming for?
Yes, actually that's where we're going. Certainly I can tell you that the product must be distributed by the building centers over the medium term. We do tests, like any entrepreneur. We try things because it is always about the deliveries. Building centers are the best positioned to serve customers. On the other hand, the demand must come from the opposite direction. These people are not there to push a product, they are there to sell a product. They have so many products on the shelves that from time to time, an employee will offer one product over another. But in general, they have so much work and the staff changes a lot. So the idea is that the demand will come from both the contractors and the individuals.
You have a lot of work to do. You seem to have a lot of energy, and yet you have side activities. I would be remiss if I didn't take advantage of your presence to talk about it. I did my research. There's even a lake bearing your name. Why is there a Lac Marco? Explain to me. Was it a request from your family or something like that?
Yes, I've been doing real estate development for a few years anyway, and I gave them all the names of my companies. Le Développement des Patriotes, Les Royaumes des Patriotes, Les Chemins du Patriote. All names like that when I had my Patriot business. And at one point, we bought a lake in St. Bruno at Lac Saint-Jean and called it Lac de l'Aquatique. There were already plenty of Lacs de l'Aquatique, and my children told me that we needed to find a name for it. There was a lake nearby called Lac Tommy, and my boy's name is Tommy. So he said to me, "Dad, why don't we call it Lac Marco?" I felt that it was a bit haughty to give my name to a lake, but we aren't on Earth for a long time. So we called it Lac Marco for that reason.
So you're from Alma, but I want to know if you're really a guy from the region. Do you snowmobile?
Of course we snowmobile.
Do you go hunting?
We go hunting and fishing.
So you're the real deal. We've talked a lot about construction, but in reality, Marco Tremblay, when we read your story, you're sensitive to energy savings and climate change and those sorts of things. I don't know if it's because you're a father that your children made you more sensitive to all of that, but your block, you believe that one of its virtues is to help fight climate change because it has environmental virtues, but also you see it as a way of building homes elsewhere other than in Quebec, in places where there's a lack of housing. Tell me about your ecological and social side.
Well, listen, in terms of ecology, when you're a hunter, a fisherman, in the past we saw all kinds of trash in the forests, but today people are very sensitive to everything that lies around. When you realize you're able to make a product that can help the environment, then you know it. People sometimes talk about going to build a cabin in the woods. There's always waste. From an environmental point of view, if we can make a product with the least possible footprint, especially since we live in the north and we drive everywhere in the north, we have immense lands which are of great beauty. I've worked a lot in Mexico, in the Philippines, and you're working with people who are beginning to have the means to have homes, but not the means. They have the financial means to own homes because they work with big companies, but they still live in tin huts in that hot weather, and you ask yourself if there's a way to help these people and put a roof over their heads.
So it gets on your nerves when you see construction sites with high percentages of unused materials that often find their way to eco-centers, and then you wonder what happens to them. They don't always have a second life. And when you travel, because you love to travel, there are things that, even though you are an entrepreneur and you love doing business, you play a role in this as well. Is it a part of your plans to continue, to get involved?
Yes, definitely. OzBlock in Quebec is a pilot factory. I see it growing quite large. We have patents in 50 countries. We are now testing. We operate a controlled laboratory. We work with Mexico. We held exhibitions in Mexico. We saw the problems that Mexico had. I'll give you a good example. We had an exhibition in Mexico City 2 years ago, before the pandemic. And there, we assembled our beautiful OzBlock walls. The first thing we were asked was, is it termite resistant? Is it resistant to humidity? There we can say that it's OSB, but it's not concrete. And the other thing that struck us, and that's why we must go on site to see, a contractor over there asked us, how do concrete floors work on OzBlock? Oh, we hadn't thought of that. As contractors, we're not used to it. Putting concrete floors on concrete blocks is their way of doing things. So during the night, we made our designers work, and we know very well that we can make floors with OzBlock, fully insulated floors for northern Canada. We lay them flat, so we made the designers work overnight to get details, and the next day we offered OzBlock floors for the constructions there to make things go faster, because what we didn't know was to build with concrete blocks takes a long time, but the floors in these southern countries take a terribly long time to put up because they don't have the structures that we have. They use wooden posts, plywood, to hold it in the air for months. At a certain point, they open it up. What kills the most people in countries like Mexico, which has big earthquakes, it's not the concrete blocks. It's the floors and roofs which are made of concrete, which are stuck under concrete blocks, which the minute it shakes, it's worthless, and it falls on their heads and kills people. So all we must change is the mentality and make it easier to build there as well, which will solve some of the structural problems that they have.
So, if I understand you correctly, it means that the OzBlock product, as we know it, will continue to evolve.
Yes, most definitely. We're working very hard on this.
Yes, I'd imagine there's a certain ecological pressure, even if it's efficient, to have even less of an environmental impact?
Right, we work hard on that. The reason we work with OSB today is because it's the most stable material on the market in the northern countries. Even plywood is less stable because it swells in water, and the wood will crack and twist. For us, if we want it to lock together, it must not move. What's the planet's environmental challenge right now? It's plastics. So we're currently working with companies to see if we're able to recover plastics that are non-recyclable to give them a new life. Especially in the southern countries. In the northern countries, as long as there's wood, like aspen, because OSB is made with aspen, it's a wood that grows quickly and isn't expensive on the market either. It doesn't rot. It's a wood that grows very quickly and has no real value other than using it in OSB, which still has a pretty good environmental footprint. But in the southern countries, we have a problem with termites and humidity. We are approached by great companies, so it's very good.
And you have chosen to join the Well Made Here program. It's a program that promotes the residential manufacturing industry in Canada. Why did you choose to join this movement?
Because sometimes we see a product and we don't know where it comes from. Does it come from the United States or elsewhere? Not everyone knows our history or goes onto the internet to find out. Well Made Here gives it a better chance. It says it's local. And with what happened in the pandemic, we ran out of products that came from elsewhere. People became more aware of the products that are on the shelves of stores, in the grocery stores, and the hardware stores. I think people are even willing to pay more to support local people and to prevent the transport of products. At least with the Well Made Here label, they know where we came from.
Exactly. When you know where you come from, you have a good chance of knowing where you're going. Thank you very much. It was a great interview. I'm happy to have been able to get the man behind OzBlock.
Merci beaucoup.